Hi, everybody. I'm Julia DiLiberti. I'm I teach humanities at College of DuPage, and I'm the Global Education Faculty Liaison. And I'm today here with Assistant Professor of Political Science, Maureen Heffern Ponicki. And did I get it right, Maureen, this time?
You did, yes.
Maureen brings a lot to the conversation. She speaks some Portuguese, some Spanish. She's lived in Peru and Brazil and Ecuador and Spain and all over the U.S. And we're here to talk about the intersections of political science and COVID. So Maureen, do you want to tell us a little bit more about who you are first?
Sure, yes. So I'm new to College of DuPage. I've been here a year. Before that, I primarily spent most of my career in the nonprofit sector. I've worked at the community level, some social work, but also community organizing. I've done international development work, global policy, worked on trade agreements and what's the impact on local people across the Western Hemisphere, but all kinds of different nonprofit strategic planning, working with young volunteers who are going off to serve in different countries around the world. And then I decided I wanted to teach. And so I went back and I'm currently finishing up my dissertation in urban and comparative politics, and I love teaching.
Oh, wow. Well, that's good. So we're lucky to have you, actually, then. You want people who love teaching, right? So,
right.
And you're bringing a lot to the table. But just in the list of things you've done makes me think about. So I want to ask you for a definition of political science, because when I think about it, I think about the economy and trade, and I think about international relations and the treaties and the standing and the invitations to summits by other countries. And then we get into things like, it doesn't seem like it would be, but healthcare, right, and COVID. And then we get into civil liberties. And then we start to get to this layer of political science, which is maybe the real crux of your discipline, which is elections and gerrymandering. And is a two-party system adequate or inadequate? And, so I guess I'm wondering first if we can have a definition of political science. And before I let you give that definition, I want to share, if you don't mind, just a cartoon I have here. I found this comment on the best physics jokes of all places, and it says, "I'm never going to use political science in the real world." And so, I have thoughts on this too, but I'd rather turn to the political scientist and get your reaction to this image, this thought.
Great.
And get it from that, get a definition of what we're talking about when we're talking about political science.
Yeah. So my job is to explain to students why that is not true.
Okay.
On a daily basis, and to really help them understand how political science is so much a part of our lived realities. So the definition that is often broadly used, and I use in the classroom because it is so darn simple, is who gets what, when, and how. Harold Lasswell, kind of considered the father of political science, coined that. And I think it's perfect. So if you really think about it, political science is the science of understanding how we as a people come together in a community to decide who's going to get this, how are they going to get it, and it's the very essence of what a community is. So decisions about food stamps or social policy or unemployment, like right now, they're all over the news. The decision about unemployment is a political decision because we're deciding how do we take care of the people who have lost jobs? Can we afford to do it? Who will do it, the state or the federal government? But it's really simply who gets what, when, and how.
So I guess I want to ask, do political scientists, I suppose you're ready for the challenge, but do political scientists ever study pandemics? Do they say, what if? What if we have a pandemic?
Well, I think what political scientists are good at doing, and I think this is where the social sciences overall kind of bleed, but we're good at looking across place and across time, since we don't have a laboratory, unlike some of the physical sciences, we have to use other ways to kind of know and learn. So the whole idea is you don't want to have to repeat mistakes. So you look across history and you look across time to say, well, what did they do in the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic? Or you look across countries and say, well, what's Germany doing or what's Taiwan doing that we're not doing? And that's the bread and butter of political scientists. Comparative politics is a subset, but in many ways people say comparison is the heart of political science. So you're always using comparison, and you're always looking at what can I learn from what's going on right at this moment, and then the research is going to just come out after all of this as we kind of really gather numbers, data to say, you know, what went wrong and how do we do it better? So when the next pandemic comes, which it will, and which we knew this one was coming as well in many ways. People had been warning of that. You know, so A, what can we learn? And then B, how do we talk to people so that they understand it? Again, back to your slide. It matters because this pandemic matters, and how politicians respond to the pandemic matters. It affects people's livelihood, their very life. It's life and death. So you don't get much more of what matters. So it's not just about health. You know, you need to learn the health science of how to fight COVID, but you need to learn the political science of how to fight COVID. They're
so
both
I think it
important.
goes back to your, I forget the man's name, the definition of who gets what, where, when, and how. And I think that maybe what COVID has done has shown us, not just in this country, but around the world, gaps in a system that doesn't necessarily allow a lot of who to get a lot of what in different circumstances. But I mean, I think that's okay. That's a great, I love it, because I had not thought of political science that way. I do want to, so one of the things I want to talk about is, I mean, you've already touched on it, but can you elaborate on this idea of where COVID and political science are intersecting? It sounds like you've already touched on like 12 directions, but if you want to give us some specifics.
Yeah. Well, so I think the broader thing is the research to kind of learn what works. And that's what political science will study across time and across, as I mentioned, across place, about what are people doing that's actually effective. So that's one thing. But then the second thing I would say is kind of very important right now, but elections. And you mentioned that elections are often thought of as what political science is. I try to talk to my students about it is way more than elections, but nonetheless, elections are very important. And right now, I think where COVID and political science intersect is really, let's look at the research at, does mail-in voting, you know, does it have a higher rate of fraud compared to in-person voting? This is where political science can help us, so that there's not, what we're trying and to teach students and community members and all of us is how to discern and how to kind of weed through the information, right? So what you're reading and what you're hearing from politicians, we know is not always correct. So as citizens, we need to kind of weed through that. So I think that's where political science comes in, because it's saying, okay, here's some research, and this is stuff that is peer reviewed, has gone through a process, so that it is not just one person's opinion, but it's saying, you know, so for example, overall voting fraud is very rare in the United States. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it's very rare. The studies on mail-in voting is also showing very rare instances of fraud, and there's 5 states that have had a completely mail-in voting election, no in-person. So we've got cases to study whether, you know, what's going on. So anyways, there's lots of other ways, but I would say generally how to approach, and then the very real upcoming challenge of elections right now.
Okay, and I'm using my new tool that you just gave me and saying that, I mean, in terms of the crux of, you know, what you described as poli-sci, elections matter because elections are determining, those are going to be the people who determine who gets the what and where they get it and how they get it. So, see, I'm going to use this now I've got a nail and a hammer. I need more tools, Maureen, but that's kind of mind-opening. That's good. Also, too, I guess I've, you know, people keep saying, well, the mailing our taxes is good enough for the IRS, so we can probably vote that way too, right? But so I guess I want to know, and you, I mean, I know you've been around. I just wonder, has COVID taken a toll on our political standing across the world? Is that something you feel you can address, or?
Oh, absolutely. What a lot of people are talking about is it's really poked a hole in the idea of American exceptionalism, and that's a hard thing for Americans to face. We have always, we have incredible scientific technology capacity, institutions of higher education, learning. I mean, we've got an incredible country. But sometimes when, and this is where political science, again comes in, if you can't learn from, the past, and you can't make those changes, then you can have all the technological and health capacity in the world. But I think what is widely understood right now is that our poor response to COVID, making us, the hot spot in the country, is a political failure. It is not a healthcare failure. It's a political failure.
Okay, so that then changes the discussion and how it's approached then.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so then in terms of, so our response affects our standing politically. Does it affect our credibility? Do other countries, we're talking G8, sorts of summits, are we considered still a viable player?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is we're still we're still a power to contend with on the world global arena, and I don't think that's changing drastically. But our legitimacy is just kind of it's chipping away a little bit at, again, that term is American exceptionalism, that somehow we figured it out better than anyone else. And I think and that could be good to chip away at that, because that will make us stronger. If you're not aware of your failings, I mean, it's the same thing applied at an individual level. If you only see what you do well, you don't dedicate the time to become better. And so I think on the world stage, we're still economically, militarily mighty. And that hasn't changed. But I do think, a little bit of legitimacy is lost. Trust, there's been,
right.
Some fear of trust because, anyways. So yes, I think it matters, but I believe that this will only help us kind of be a little more humble, look at how we can improve, and that will make us stronger in the long term.
Okay. Hopefully. So I want to get back to your questions of election, or we both sort of touched on elections and wonder if but I guess I'm also curious to know what political scientists study governments as well, right? And so I'm intrigued by the notion of, people were thinking that if you lived in an authoritarian country, the cases would be less, right? And we found that that's not the case with COVID, and we're not. But then, there was a study of Portugal, Brazil, and Argentina, Brazil, and Peru, and the different governments, and Mexico, and the different governments, and that what you might expect. Brazil, for example, sort of authoritarian, and yet the cases are really high. So I was just wondering if you have looked at that or thought about that, or if that's,
Yeah. So actually, that's a great example of how political science can help kind of weed through what sometimes you see at the surface. You think, oh, that's the variable that's impacting the outcome, and the research and the science kind of says, well, let's go deeper and see, is there something else at play. So I think you're referring to the article that the research that compared Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico.
I made up Peru. I'm sorry, because you've been there.
Yes.
Yeah, and that came from America's Quarterly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really interesting because it was saying that how rooted the political party is in each country. And so if the political party was very rooted ideologically and had support of its people, then it had more freedom to make kind of, especially authoritarian decisions, so lockdowns, et cetera. So, for example, Argentina recently, the Peronist party got voted back in. So that party has a long history in Argentina and a lot of support from the population. So when Fernandez made made decisions, he had more support. Whereas in Latin America, you often have these kind of pop-up political parties, unlike the U.S. But they have multi-party systems. So, a group that, like, I think in Peru, they'd have Cambio 24, like and this party and that party, and then it changes name. Those aren't rooted. And so when a party like that tries to make a decision, there's less support from the people. So that was the one finding. The second was the power, how it's divided between the federal government and the governors, which actually is very important in the US case as well. So when the federal government was very strong and had a unified message and plan, that they were able to keep the cases down. When the federal government was weaker, so even though Argentina is a federalist country, their governors have less power compared to Brazil, where their governors have more power. Okay. But when they had a unified plan from the national government, they had better success at keeping the rates down. And then the third was, which should not be surprising, but history of social policy and kind of what we call welfare states. So countries that had a strong social policy, so a way to support people when you're telling them not to go to work. Those right. countries fared better. Countries that don't have that, in Latin America especially, you have large informal sector, and people are saying, how? I can't not work. I literally will die. But if there's a social safety net, then you can ask people to stay home. So anyways, that's a great example of research showing that it might not just even be like in Brazil, the media will say, and I don't think it's totally false, but is that it's Bolsonaro, the leader of Brazil, who's the problem. And to be fair, Bolsonaro has been problematic, yet what this research says, it might be some other factors that are really showing us.
Yeah, and whether a sort of more moderate person in that party would have been in power, it's the support of the party. So I have two questions for you, because I want to translate what you just said to our elections, if you want to talk about that. But before that, I guess I just have a quick question. Do you think support means trust? I mean, are you saying that support of a party is trust of a party?
Absolutely. Trust is really important. I was listening to, there's a guy who does research on organizational management and change, and he talks about how critical trust in your leader is, especially in a time of crisis. You have to be able to trust that leader. So yes, that would be associated with the rootedness of a party if you trust who they are, what they stand for. And I think in Argentina, that you could probably say there was a higher level of trust, definitely, in that leader. Okay. And party.
And party. And that reminds me, I keep wanting to get back to our elections in this. This reminds me of that Confucian analect where the student says to Confucius, if you had to give up bread, arms, or trust, if the people had to give up one, what should they give up? And he said, well, you should give up arms first, and then food second. And the student's very surprised by this, and he said, without trust in the people, without the trust of the people, you can't.
Yes. Yes.
So.
And that's actually been something that's very challenging in the U.S. because over time, levels of trust, both people of the U.S., not even just federal, but like of all leaders, we have least amount of trust in our national leaders, more trust of our local leaders, but trust has been going down over time. And so I think, and we know we've gotten an increasingly partisan climate with low trust, and that's not good.
So let's turn to the U.S. then, because both of our parties are deeply rooted in our system. We have a two-party system, and we should come back and talk about the two-party system unless you think it's relevant here. But I mean, I guess I'm wondering then if you can take the intersections of COVID and political science and talk to us about how it's affecting maybe elections here or trust in the parties.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think the biggest thing is, as we look at the November election, there's two things. One, will people trust, let's say we move to a more mail-in. 75% of Americans already can vote by mail. So it's not a complete change, but I think in the psyche of people, it feels as if it is, and
Right.
thus it's an issue of trust. So do we trust that? So for example, what I said, the research shows that there's very little fraud, but what good is the research if people don't trust that? And
Right.
so losing trust, you lose everything. So people can say, well, here's all the information, I'm giving it to you, but if you don't trust your government, then you may not hear that information. But so I think the issue of electoral fraud and the trust is important coming up, but also administrative capacity. Like, I just heard a couple of people talking about the real challenge for the November elections is that all these counties that are running and states that are running these elections, they will have to run an in-person election as well as a mail-in election, which is like running two completely different elections at the same time. And administratively, that's very complicated. And so they were saying that they really see it's the administrative capacity that is going to be our challenge for November. So the challenge of trust, if we do go to mail-in, secondly, the administrative capacity, and then I would say third is depending, the results aren't going to come in right away. And we should be preparing for that now. We're used to sitting on our couches on election night and watching the returns and knowing it may be 1 or 2 in the morning, but oftentimes we know who won the election. Most likely we will not know, and that's okay, but we need to begin to get that out to the population.
Yeah, right, exactly, because that's not something we're thinking about, right? And everyone's going to worry that there's, are we upending our own system, and are we lying, and are we...
Yes. Yeah, is something amiss that we don't know. And then, and related to that, what I think is really important is when those election results come out, trust, again, you brought up a perfect point, will we trust that they're correct and that there wasn't fraud? And so for example, I was listening to a bunch of political scientists talk about this, and they were saying it'll be really important to see, say Trump does not get elected, which who knows, but say he doesn't. If he questions those results, that could be very dangerous to American democracy. And we have been blessed with having peaceful transitions of powers since the beginning of our country. And
we have this document that we totally believe in, right? We the people, and we it's amazing to us. It's a piece of paper, but one that's, you might want to say is part of our DNA, right, as Americans. And so
yes, but they often call that a parchment barrier. It's just a piece of paper.
Right.
And so the parchment barrier is just the paper. People, vigilance, trust, and institutions are the eternal vigilance to make sure that that piece of paper is protected. So what these people were talking about, which I thought was a great point, was saying, well, it'll really be important say Trump questioned the results. And this is all hypothetical because he could win, but
sure,
say he
absolutely.
didn't win, or say Biden didn't win and he questions the result. It'll be really important how the media responds to that and how the party of that candidate responds. And the hope is that our institutions are strong enough, that American institutions are strong enough, and institutions would mean political parties, media, Congress. If they all stand by the integrity of our election system, then we're in a good place.
And even in 2000, we had to call in the judiciary. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes,
if they don't,
we're turning it a corner into new territory that none of us want to go into.
There was a summit, I forget, an activity, I can't remember the word I'm looking for, and NPR was reporting on this sort of thing that you're talking about, that they invited people of both parties, reconfigured them into the Trump and Biden camps, and and then so it didn't matter what party you were on. You might be 6 Democrats and 4 Republicans on the Trump team, but they said. Biden wins, how does your team respond? Trump wins, and the idea was categorically, I won't tell you the results, go listen to the NPR study, but it was pretty stunning in terms of which team, whatever the political makeup was, and they did repeated exercises in that, but one team was more ruthless and sort of talking about the things you're saying, turning into new territory, looking for ways to do that. So I should have had that link ready to put up and have people listen to. I didn't know you were going to go. I didn't know you were going to talk about it. Maureen, I think I had a couple of questions I want to ask, but I think we've gone in some different. I mean, I think you've covered a lot. So let me ask you: are there things that you? Okay, wait. Let me ask you this, just for the benefit of the historians. There's a lot of overlap between poli-sci and history, and a little bit between philosophy. But I would say. What's the big distinction between historians and political scientists?
Yeah, well, obviously historians really just study history, where political science takes history into account, but doesn't purely study the past. So some political scientists are only looking at current, like, so if you're looking at elections and modeling for the future, which that's a very controversial models in general these days, and polls are controversial. But I was just thinking of here's a good intersection. We've always said, remember that phrase, "It's the economy, stupid."
Yes.
It goes back to the early 90s. And so it's always kind of become a given that it's really how the economy is faring that will dictate the outcome of an election. And if the economy is doing well, then the incumbent will stay in office. And so I was just listening and looking at new research that is calling that into question and saying that some of the models were based on faulty evidence. So I think I'm saying this because I think this relates to political science does a lot of quantitative analysis and modeling and looking at data of elections. It also does qualitative research that will incorporate comparative historical analysis. But I think that's one of the distinguishing factors is the type of research, the contemporaneous versus historical. Right. And then also political science, takes in economics is a big part of it. It's really with sociology, economics, history, all of that, they all intersect to understand the political world.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I didn't mean to surprise you with that. So I want to also ask too, because I'm thinking about you talked earlier about data and data that's been vetted. And I guess I want people to understand that peer review means it's gone out beyond the author and the editor, and that nobody has to check a box on what political party you are before you review an article. So that peer reviewed means you can be drawn from your reading a text for its veracity and its argument, right? And so peer-reviewed is not just Democrats go in their little bubble and get their stuff reviewed, and Republicans go in their little bubble. A reviewer can be drawn from anybody, correct?
Absolutely. And the concept of blind review is really important to that, because you don't know, if you're a reviewer, you don't know who wrote this article. So you're taking away that bias. But as you said, the political science, my experience has been they do a very good job of taking out the partisan. So partisan is political parties. Political science is much broader than that. And I like the field for that reason, because it says you can step back out of that muck and say, let's look at data, let's look at the research. Again, this is what we need when we're in muddled times, is to look broader, more comprehensively, and then having this whole peer review setup, while not perfect, and everybody knows it is not perfect, but it does a very good job of kind of saying, it's not just some random person who put these numbers together and put out a study. You would never get it published. So when we talk to our students and say, if you really want to look for evidence, your best evidence is going to be something that went through that peer review process.
Okay, great, great, great. Now, Maureen, if I hadn't been here to interrupt you from time to time, and you were just here talking, and are there things that you wanted to say that I didn't get to ask you, or that I didn't think to ask you, or any thoughts you wanted to close with?
Well, the one thing I guess I would say is in Illinois, there was a law that was just passed that will automatically send mail-in voter applications to all voters who voted since 2018. So I guess I'm saying this to get the word out to people. An application will come in the mail. If you want, you can go, just Google voting in Illinois and you'll get the voter registration site. You can just sign up for an application. You will send that in. If you live in DuPage County, you'll send it to DuPage. If you live in Cook, you'll send it to Cook. But I want people to know that. Also, November 3rd in Illinois is now a school and government holiday to make it easier.
Is that permanent or just this year? Do you know?
I don't know.
I think I know for sure.
Do you know?
No, I know for sure it's this year, but
and there is a federal lawsuit that the Republican Party just is putting in a lawsuit because they say that this new law of the voter applications being automatically mailed will give a partisan advantage to the Democrats. Now, again, research. So taking off the partisan hat, what has the research showed us? The research has showed us that there is no partisan advantage to voting by mail. You will read, some people will say, if you vote by mail, it increases turnout. When you increase turnout, that will aid the Democrats. But the studies that they've done that have been peer-reviewed have shown that there is no partisan advantage. So we don't know what will happen with this lawsuit, but I would say if anybody knows that they don't want to go to the polls in November, just get on the web right now and you can request a an application for a mail-in ballot.
And I got mine from DuPage County, and they actually send you a little magnet with the dates by when you need to apply, when you need to mail it in, and when the election is. So they're pretty organized about it. So
yeah, and actually, like somebody was talking about, like Florida, which tends to be a more Republican state, but has a lot of older people who are at high risk for COVID. The mail-in, it's not a partisan issue. In many places, the 5 states that currently have only mail-in voting elections, you can't even go to a poll, has broad bipartisan support.
Right,
right. I think, getting this information out to people so that they can take that partisan muck out of it is important.
And I think if you give more people access to the ballot who may not be able to go because of transportation, or who may be too ill to leave, or who may be afraid of getting ill in this particular election, then you do increase turnout, which may give a more realistic picture of who wants what. I think as we go back, you say who wants to vote for who gets what resources, what access. And
yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I always talk with my students, there's a lot of ways to impact the political system to get who gets what, when, and how, but kind of the primary way is voting, and I would say don't stop there. If you want to do, write letters, get involved, run for office, all of that, but at least vote, because we can't make those decisions about who gets what, when, and how when only less than 50% of our population votes.
Right. Great. Thank you. Anything else you want to add before we take off?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Thanks, Maureen. I'm going to annoy all my friends, and I'm going to be using this new tool you've given me, citing it all over and making a Facebook post right after this. So thanks. Maybe as elections draw near, if you think you have more thoughts, I know you'll have more thoughts, but if you have thoughts you want to add about the election, we would certainly invite you back. So
great. Thank you.
Maureen.
Thanks for having me.